Hello, and welcome to the training to discuss the Administration Code Regulation 703 KAR 5:080. My name is Devin Avery, and I am a program consultant in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. This training must be completed prior to administering any state required or optional assessments that are used in accountability, which include KSA, AKSA, WIDA Access and WIDA Alternate Access for ELLs, the College Admissions Exam, CTE EOP, and CTE Industry Certification Exams, and others. If you are providing accommodations for students with an IEP, 504, or PSP, you will also need to complete the Inclusion of Special Populations Regulation training. The support materials that you received include Administration Code for Kentucky's Educational Assessment Program, this PowerPoint, and the training videos. These may be accessed on the Assessment Regulation Training webpage. This regulation was updated in August 2024, and this training and documents reflect the most recent updates. Kentucky's Assessment and Accountability Program includes multiple assessments and data reports. This administration code shall be followed for all state-required assessments and optional tests administered by school personnel that are reported in Kentucky's accountability system. This regulation applies to test administrations using paper or pencil and computers or digital technology. The administration code shall also be followed for any field test administrations for potentially operational tests. Throughout this training, we will discuss the rationale, training protocols, test security, test preparation or test prep, the inclusion of special populations, and the alternate assessment. Throughout this presentation, when you see page numbers referenced, they correlate to the page where you can find the information in the regulation. So let's begin with an introduction. The standards used for determining appropriate assessment practices are professional ethics, educational defensibility, and student ownership. Students and schools have the right to valid and reliable test results. Actions taken by anyone involved with test administration, including designing and using test preparation practice, shall be done to benefit students' overall learning and not to solely gain a testing advantage. The assessments are designed for students to demonstrate their understanding. Inappropriate assistance can lead to invalid and unreliable test results, impacting students, parents, schools, and communities. If inappropriate assistance is given, it can compromise the integrity of the test results. This not only affects the individual student's academic record, but also has broader implications for parents, schools, and the community at large. Accurate assessments are crucial for making informed decisions about educational strategies and resource allocation, and any compromise in their validity can undermine these efforts. The Kentucky Department of Education, or KDE, is required to have an accountability system that is inclusive of all students and shall hold schools and school districts accountable for the performance of all students. Anyone with the potential to be involved with any component of the state-required testing must be trained on the Administration Code regulation before beginning the work. This could include, but is not limited to, principals, off-grade teachers, substitutes, accommodation providers, library media specialists, etc. Individuals providing accommodations to students with an IEP, 504, or PSP must also receive training on the Inclusion of Special Populations regulation. Volunteers involved in state testing, such as providing accommodations or helping with proctoring, must meet certain stipulations that also apply to school staff, be trained in both administration code and inclusion of special populations, and sign non-disclosure agreements. No student may administer a state assessment, and this includes peer tutors. Solely reading the regulation shall not be considered adequate training. Training shall include interaction regarding the content of the regulation with supporting examples and situations. Schools and districts may use materials provided by KDE or locally produced. Once training is completed, test administrators should complete the signature page or sign a group training signature sheet. These should be retained at the district level. Districts are charged with maintaining records of individuals receiving administration code training. The participants' records may be maintained through collecting individual signature sheets found on the last page of the regulation document or by the retention of group training attendance signature pages. Copies of the signature page or group training attendance sheet may be maintained in hard copy or electronic format. Please make sure you are using the most current version of the signature sheets based on the August 2024 regulation update. A copy of the group signature sheet is available on the KDE website. Training participants are held professionally accountable for their actions after signing either type of signature sheet. Notice that both sheets state, "By signing, I acknowledge having received and read a copy of the administration code for Kentucky's Educational Assessment Program 703 KAR 5:080 and have participated in training for this regulation. I also agree to comply with the complete content of the regulation and understand that I will be held professionally accountable." Now, let's take a look at test security. Secure test materials will vary slightly by assessment, but the most common examples are shown on this slide. For online testing, test tickets and seal codes, such as the ones created from the PAN system for TestNav that students use to test, are considered secure materials. Once these items are printed, you must keep them secure until they are distributed on the test day. After the test ticket and seal codes have been used, they will be returned to the BAC to be securely destroyed. Paper and pencil tests and accommodated test kits will contain test booklets, which contain the test questions and answer documents to secure. Sometimes the test booklet and answer documents are combined into one. Scratch paper is available to students when testing online and in paper pencil testing formats. Scratch paper is considered a secure material since test questions or answers could be gleaned from these papers. Schools are permitted to print the test ticket on a single page so that the student may use the rest of the page as scratch paper, which reduces the amount of paper that must be secured. Let's look at acceptable and not acceptable practices when handling secure testing materials. Pages 5 through 7 in the Administration Code Regulation contains the test materials section, divided into the acceptable and not acceptable columns. Test administrators need test administration manuals in advance of testing to read and prepare for sessions. Following test manual directions and reading the scripts aloud is essential for a successful standardized administration and avoiding an allegation. Scripts are updated yearly and are unique to each assessment. Reading all parts of the script ensures that the student's test results are valid and reliable. Only school-managed testing computers or devices, including any devices used for accommodation purposes in a student's individual plan, may be used for assessment administration. All persons helping with testing, including technical support staff, must sign a non-disclosure form each calendar year. The addition of technical support staff is new in the 2024 update. Any volunteers or substitutes helping with testing are also required to sign a non-disclosure form. These non-disclosure forms can be found on the KDE website. It is not acceptable to make any secure test materials, including test booklets, student test tickets, seal codes, or other materials available to test administrators before the first scheduled day of testing. When not being used for a scheduled testing session, all assessment materials shall be stored in a double-locked secure location with access granted to authorized personnel only and should never be left outside of that double-locked storage. This includes materials used for off-site testing. If secure test materials such as seal codes or student test tickets are found written on the board of a classroom, sitting on a desk, or even laying in the hallway, that will have to be reported as an allegation. It is not acceptable to reproduce secure test materials in any way. This includes discussing, emailing, photographing, writing, typing, saving to a cloud-based drive such as Google Drive, or posting to social media or any internet sites. Let's continue with more confidential test content. There are times when test materials may need to be taken from a school for off-site testing. This may include computers, paper test books, etc. Test security must be maintained while transporting materials used for home, hospital administration, or off-site administration. Leaving materials with students in a home hospital setting is unacceptable. Secure materials must always be under the guardianship of trained staff. Off-site testing is an acceptable practice with online and paper testing. As a reminder, in-person online testing can only be conducted by trained staff. Please ensure the testing environment is free of content related to the test, only the student and trained staff are present, and the student does not have additional internet devices in the room. No test administration may occur via online meeting services such as Google Meet, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. Students utilizing paper and pencil testing may be using non-standard response modes, such as Braille responses, which may be maintained temporarily to ensure that responses are not lost prior to the return shipment of printed responses with secure test materials. After testing is complete and student responses have been prepared for return shipment, any non-standard versions are to be deleted or destroyed. The test administration manual for each assessment will give instructions on collection, destruction, or return of secure test materials. Maintenance of these materials after a test window is an administration code violation. We've covered the acceptable practices. Let's look at the not acceptable practices concerning secure test materials. It is unacceptable to take test materials out of the school or district building for any reason except for approved off-site testing. Bubbling demographics or modifying materials for the alternate assessment shall be completed on school property. Any secure test items, pre-writing areas, drafts, or electronic versions should not be scored or maintained. Lastly, a student shouldn't transport or move their test materials from one location to another without being escorted or monitored by trained testing staff. For example, a student receiving extended time needs to move to another room to complete the assessment. An adult who has received administration code training should transport and escort the student to the secondary location to finish. KDE employs vendors who specialize in various data forensic techniques as part of its test monitoring process. The purpose is to examine inconsistencies that could indicate wrongdoing and investigate as needed. The investigation could be used to absolve suspected misconduct. Some discoveries of inappropriate practices can be cheat sheets, adults changing student answers, or students receiving help or verbal cues from administrators. Data forensics also help locate secure test items that may have been published on social media sites, released as part of test prep materials, or entered into artificial intelligence databases. The U.S. Department of Education requires that states demonstrate the technical soundness of their assessment system. Part of this process is site visit monitoring. Each year, staff from the Office of Assessment and Accountability visit schools during the testing windows. The visits are announced to the District Assessment Coordinator, or DAC, shortly before the team arrives at the school building. Sites are chosen by both purposeful and random selection. OAA staff will interview school and district staff and request to see storage and testing areas. During the interview process, staff present may include the DAC, BAC, principal, and anyone familiar with the assessment being monitored. For the spring KSA visits, this also includes the AKSA. Certain documents are also collected at the time of the visit. Any situation that violates the administration code or inclusion of special populations regulations is reported as an allegation. Allegations are then investigated by KDE staff. They require documentation of the incident to be submitted and can include additional school visits and interviews with those involved. This is one of several slides containing suggestions based on past reports that will help prevent future allegations. Every year, several allegations happen surrounding secure test items. If you have written a seal code on the board, please erase it after the test session. Make sure all student test tickets are collected and returned to the BAC. Do not allow the tickets to be left in the classroom or dropped in the hallway, etc. Sometimes students may receive the wrong test ticket. Have your proctor double check the ticket and student to make sure they match. Finally, please do not allow students to carry or handle their test tickets outside of the testing session if they are not being actively monitored by trained testing staff. This includes allowing student office aides to deliver test tickets to rooms. Now it's time for our first check for understanding. Let's read through these yes or no questions and discuss the answers. Number 1, is it acceptable to take photos of test items for use in designing instructional materials to know that you are teaching the correct content? No, it is unacceptable to take pictures of test items for use next year to teach the correct content. Concepts appropriate for curriculum instruction can be found in Kentucky's content standards. Test administrators may use release test items and support materials posted on the KDE website to help prepare students for the assessment. Question 2, is it acceptable for testing staff to receive or access test administration manuals or TAMs prior to the first day of testing? The answer is yes. It is acceptable for testing staff to receive paper or electronic TAMs prior to the first day of testing. Other secure test items may not be distributed until the test session. Question 3, is it acceptable to read only the bold type instruction script in TAMs and scripts and skip the test administrator directions if you have been a test administrator in previous years? No, it is not acceptable to read only the bold type instruction script in the TAMs and skip the test administrator directions for those who have been test administrators in previous years. Test manuals and scripts are updated yearly. Question 4, is it acceptable to administer a state assessment for a virtual or home hospital student using Google Meet, Zoom, Teams, etc.? The answer is no. All state testing must be administered in person by trained personnel. The reference to online testing refers to the test platform, not the delivery method. Page 10 of the regulation states that test administrators shall be physically present in the testing environment while students are actively testing. In this next section of the training, we will discuss classroom materials such as classroom displays, calculators, and electronic devices. Resources and material available to students during testing are dependent upon the assessment. Please check the test administration manual for further guidance on what should be present at a student workstation during testing. Testing room surfaces should be free of content information or strategies for solving problems during operational and field testing. This means bulletin boards and walls, all surfaces. It is acceptable to place instructional materials on bulletin boards or walls throughout the year, but when the room is used for testing, those same content materials must be removed or covered. Covered means with a covering that is opaque and not see-through. Examples of materials that may not be displayed during assessments include anything that may contain relevant content information or strategies for solving problems. These materials may be anywhere in the room. walls, ceilings, floors, windows, and clothing. Yes, clothing. The purpose of this is to make sure that all students have access to the same resources and that nobody has an advantage over others. Let's take a closer look at some of these materials. Motivational posters or materials without content and standard periodic tables can remain on the walls. Periodic tables are listed in the regulation as being acceptable, and accessing one does not give an advantage if the student does not understand how to read the periodic table. The materials on the right are acceptable during instruction but must be covered up during assessment. These are examples of materials that contain content, problem-solving strategies, or processes, and they are unacceptable for display or use during testing sessions. Even things painted on the walls that could be considered content, three-dimensional sculptures or paintings used in a lesson must be covered. Calendars and classroom schedules are also included because they can be used as number lines. During assessments, administrators must not provide or allow access to any materials not included in the assessment materials or TAMs. Prohibited items include acronym sheets, answer organization tools, textbooks, and printed writing rubrics. Students with an IEP, 504, or PSP plan may be allowed resources consistent with their plan and instructional strategies. Check with your BAC for accommodation details. For both test booklets and online testing, students may use blank writing or graph paper, content-free overlays, or bookmarks to indicate session limits. Students may not use dry erase boards for scratch paper. This is because scratch paper has to be handled according to the directions in the TAM. Some test platforms, such as TestNav, contain tools such as calculators, highlight, and dictionaries. The test administration manual will list approved and unapproved materials and when it is appropriate to provide any resources. On-demand writing is the only content area where a student is allowed to have a dictionary or thesaurus. Online testing provides an electronic dictionary and thesaurus to each student. A classroom set of dictionaries and thesauri should be available for students for paper or pencil testing or as a backup for online testing. Please refer to the TAM for the specific assessment you are administering for details. Dictionary use for English learners is addressed in the Inclusion of Special Populations Regulation and Training. Reading, mathematics, science, and social studies content area tests do not allow the use of a dictionary or thesaurus unless clearly stated as an accommodation in a student plan. Students may not leave the testing area to obtain any resources used for accommodation. It is a local decision by schools or districts on whether to allow students access to non-content related materials, such as books or puzzles, after the student has turned in their testing materials to the test administrator. Please note this is after the student has no testing materials at the workstation. Students will use online calculators provided during the test, unless accommodations mandate handheld calculators. Any student taking a paper or pencil assessment may use an approved handheld calculator on sections where calculator use is permitted for all students, or on any section if the student has a calculator accommodation. Consult the TAM for the assessment you are administering to determine if calculators are permitted for each test section. When the use of a handheld calculator is indicated, schools may provide calculators that meet acceptable use criteria. Handheld calculators used for paper or pencil or accommodated testing should adhere to the KDE calculator policy, which is available on the KDE website. Be familiar with the requirements of each assessment that you administer. Some test vendors, such as the vendor for the college admissions exam, have calculator policy requirements that may differ from KDE. Test administrators must disable computer algebraic systems, communication ability, and internet on devices during testing. Again, see your TAM or the calculator policy for more details. It is not acceptable for students to share calculators, so please ensure a one-to-one ratio of calculators to students. Constant changes in personal technology make our job of maintaining a fair and unbiased testing environment more difficult. Online testing platforms provide a secure portal to prevent accessing other parts of the internet. This is to prevent any kind of testing advantage that may happen if a student accesses an app or website that could help them answer any part of the test. School-wide use of the internet for instructional purposes is acceptable for students not participating in testing. Internet use should be appropriately minimized if needed to accommodate testing. Students who finish a test session should not access the internet, wireless communication functions, or imaging capabilities on electronic devices during testing sessions for purposes other than test administration until all students in the room have finished testing and materials are collected or online sessions are closed. One example of students using a personal electronic device for test administration would be a student who uses an augmentative and alternative communication or AAC device. This would not include an electronic translation device, which could impact test security. It is acceptable for test administrators to use electronic devices to contact school administrators regarding test sessions, such as problems with materials, student illness, administration questions, breaks, etc., as long as such use does not impair their ability to actively monitor students during active test sessions. However, neither students nor test administrators shall use electronic devices such as, but not limited to, cell phones, tablets, and e-readers for personal reasons during test sessions, except in the case of an emergency. Test administrators should be communicating with the BAC or a designee only, and not with each other while testing is occurring. There are many allegations that occur due to student personal electronic devices, ranging from cell phones ringing during an assessment to students actively utilizing earbuds, watches, or burner phones. Some TAMs include instructions for electronic device protocols, such as requiring that they be powered off and in a location that is not accessible during testing. In this case, follow the test administration manual. If there are no specific instructions in the TAM, schools may create local protocols surrounding electronic device storage during test sessions. Some schools require student cell phones to be turned off and checked in with a teacher before testing. Others require student devices to be left in a locker or outside of the room. As you begin your test session, remind students that electronic device use is not permitted during the session and that devices should be at least powered down and placed out of arm's reach. Students should not access the internet or any electronic devices until the test session is finished. Any electronic devices such as earbuds, smartwatches, or other Bluetooth-enabled devices may not be used unless medically necessary. Active monitoring during testing is the most effective means of mitigating allegations concerning electronic devices. It is time for our second check for understanding. So again, we will go through these yes or no questions and then discuss the answers. Question 1. Is it acceptable for a teacher to use their personal cell phone to communicate with another teacher about a testing situation in the classroom? The answer is no. It is not acceptable for a teacher to use their personal cell phone to communicate with another teacher about a testing situation in the classroom. However, that teacher and the BAC or a designee may communicate regarding testing situations. Question 2. Is it acceptable to allow general education students to use a handheld calculator instead of the online calculator? Again, no, it is not acceptable to allow students to use handheld calculators instead of the online calculator unless the online calculator is not functioning or the student has a disability and plan requiring a handheld calculator. Question 3, is it acceptable to leave content on the walls in the testing room when administering a field test? No, it is not acceptable to leave content visible during any state assessment, whether operational or field test. Question 4, is it acceptable to allow students to read library or personal books as each student finishes and test materials are collected? Yes, it is acceptable to allow students to read library or personal books as each student finishes and test materials are collected. This is a local decision to allow this practice or not. Now let's take a look at appropriate administration practices. These are the roles of DACs or BACs. DACs or BACs shall schedule test administration, arrange for adequate staff to administer assessments, prepare accurate student testing rosters and seating charts, distribute correct testing materials to students as assigned, and ensure that all assessment materials are kept secure before, during, and after test sessions. Let's start with scheduling. Test sections shall be administered in the order in which they appear in the test administration manuals. For example, if a TAM presents an editing and mechanics assessment before an on-demand writing session, the students should test in that order. If a teacher gives the on-demand writing prior to the editing and mechanics, that would be an allegation. Students in the same grade in each school should be simultaneously tested in the same content area and test session. Please refer to the TAM for each specific assessment for makeup testing and other extenuating circumstances. Tests should be scheduled to avoid conflicts with lunch. However, if a lunch break is required during testing, test materials shall be secured and students shall be escorted to the lunchroom, told not to discuss the test, and sufficiently monitored to prevent discussion of test items during the entire lunch period before being escorted back to the testing area. A daily test schedule may be changed to provide accommodations as long as all students in the same grade in that building have completed that section by the end of the school day. This means that students with accommodations may not be tested on a different day from students without accommodations. They would all need to be tested on the same day. Students may not stay beyond their normal school hours to complete testing. Plan your schedule to be sure all students will complete their assessment by the end of the school day. Even if the daily schedule changes, the test must still be administered in order. Some assessments do provide for flexibility and schedule exceptions. This should be referred to KDE. Students may not work ahead to future test sections or return to past test sections once submitted. All state required tests must have a seating chart. Seating charts can be for group testing, classroom layout, or individual testing, which we often see for accommodated or makeup testing. The chart may be kept in paper or electronic format and completed by the classroom teacher. A chart will be completed for each test session and kept on file. Some assessments provide a seating chart, or sometimes the DAC or BAC will supply the teacher or proctor with a locally created seating chart template, especially if your room arrangement is significantly different. Example templates created by KDE are available on the KDE website. Using the same seating chart for more than one test session is acceptable, especially if you are testing more than one section on the same day with the same students. All seating charts should contain a diagram of the room layout and location of teachers and students, even in small group or one-to-one test sessions. Seating charts should be completed prior to a test session and updated afterward to reflect the most accurate information. Again, you may scan these and save electronically. All seating charts should include the test name, district and school names, the test date, room number, content area being tested, all student names, names of all testing staff in the room, and the room layout. You may have to adjust this form for offsite testing to include a location, name, and address. If it is the student's home, you do not have to include the address. Student names should be placed in the appropriate places on the room layout. Indicate on the chart if a student is absent or if there is an empty seat. Using the same seating chart for more than one session is acceptable, again, especially if you are testing more than one section on the same day with the same students. If you have questions about a seating chart you or your school have created, check with your DAC. Active monitoring means staff walking up and down the aisles of the classroom, staying visible at all times, and ensuring that outside technology is not being used by students. It is the responsibility of principals and district administrators to ensure that proper monitoring occurs. Checking email, grading papers, lesson planning, etc., does not allow for active monitoring. Areas accommodating large numbers of students, such as arena testing in a gym or library, should have adequate staff to conduct active monitoring. In addition, a test administrator should not leave the testing environment during an active test session without being relieved by another trained member of staff. Students should never be left unattended during a test session or with secure materials. Students who exhibit disruptive behavior prior to or during testing may be tested in a different location from their peers. A plan to avoid a disruptive situation can be in place prior to testing. Interval or restroom breaks are at the discretion of the school or district and held between test sessions. Refreshment breaks are acceptable. However, materials must be collected, secured away from the student, and students should be sufficiently monitored during breaks and other unstructured activities to prevent discussion of test items. If students take a stretch break inside the classroom, materials need to be collected and secured. If testing online, the section must be submitted. If the materials are collected and secured, there is less chance of a possible violation of test security. If an individual student needs a restroom break during a test session, they must be monitored. If the school or district has approved interval or restroom breaks, the length of time, refreshments served, and monitoring of students must not affect testing integrity in any way. It is advised to schedule tests to avoid conflicts with lunch. However, if a lunch break is required during testing, lunch shall be brought to the students in the testing area. Suppose there are too many students for this to be reasonably accomplished. In that case, test materials shall be secured and students should be escorted to the lunchroom, told not to discuss the test, sufficiently monitored to prevent discussion of test items during the entire lunch period, and then escorted back to the testing area. Test administrators must be careful not to influence or take ownership of a student's responses. This may require suspending some actions that are routinely done during instruction. It is acceptable to advise all students before testing begins and at the 5-minute warning to do such things as double check their work or look for items that they may have forgotten to answer and submit properly when they are finished. Test administrators should ensure that students are logged into the appropriate test, which could include making sure the student has received the correct test ticket, or for paper tests, making sure they're in the appropriate area of the test book and student response book at the beginning of each session. As part of monitoring, test administrators should ensure that students do not get off track in their work. While doing this, they may not specifically direct individual students to go back to skipped or omitted items. It is not acceptable to encourage students to edit any responses by providing an evaluation of their work through tone, gesture, or phrase such as, "You can do better," or "You can write more." Coaching, editing, and pointing out errors or missing answers in the student's work or any test item to improve student scores is unacceptable. No one at any time is to alter student answers. Doing so can lead to sanctions by the Education Professional Standards Board, EPSB. Changing student answers doesn't solely mean physically altering, but also means such things as leading, coaching, or giving answers. Some allegation prevention tips regarding monitoring include not leaving students physically unattended during testing, even for a few moments. Leaving students unattended also includes inattention due to preoccupation with other tasks. Best practice also includes having a plan in place to monitor hallways or providing escorts for student breaks. It's time for our third check for understanding. Again, we will read through these yes or no questions and then discuss the answers. Question 1. Is it acceptable to change the order of the test to facilitate calculators or other accommodations? No, it is not acceptable to change the order of the test. The schedule may change, but the test must be given in the order it appears in the TAM. Question 2. Is it acceptable for a disruptive student to be tested away from their peers, even if that student does not have a plan? Yes, students who exhibit disruptive behavior prior to or during testing may be tested in a different location from their peers. This plan to avoid disruptive situations can be in place prior to testing. This is a local decision, and documentation may be kept at your district level. Question 3. Is it acceptable for students to take an unscheduled break during an active test session without a monitor? No, students may not take unmonitored breaks during active test sessions. Question 4. Is it acceptable to give evaluative feedback during testing, such as try to write a little more or are you sure that's all? The answer is no. While phrases such as do your best, get started, and stay on task are acceptable, any comments that could be construed as evaluative or coaching are not acceptable. The section of the regulation pertaining to appropriate test preparation, good faith effort checklist, and student rewards begins on page 13 of the Administration Code regulation document. Test simulation practices are allowed under certain circumstances. Students should be familiar with using test-taking strategies for assessments, such as those used in the classroom, direct formative assessments, etc., not just strategies for the use on state-required assessments. Activities related to testing preparation should be planned to improve student learning, including analyzing student results, student feedback, and advancing instruction. Events for the sole purpose of raising test scores or practice with no feedback are not acceptable. Testing activities that provide feedback that benefit student learning are permitted and encouraged. Regular instruction must continue during the testing window, except during the test sessions, and the order of instruction should not be altered to match the order of content area test. Test prep courses, whether developed by teachers, districts, or commercially bought products, are acceptable as long as the results are used to identify student strengths and weaknesses and guide instruction. Good faith effort checklists may be used at any grade. The checklist expectations should be general, should not include any evaluative feedback, and should not contain requirements that will take away student ownership, such as requiring the use of a particular organizer or pre-writing strategy, requiring students to use scratch paper to show their work, specifying a certain number of paragraphs for a response, or spending a certain amount of time on the test. The checklist may consist of coming prepared for testing with a charged device, arriving on time, not disturbing others, using time wisely, and focusing on testing during the administration time. Please note, scanning student responses does not mean reading or skimming over the student work. It only means monitoring to be sure that students are actively working on the test. No feedback from the good faith effort checklist can be given to students until all testing is complete and materials have been returned to the BAC or DAC. The district or school can decide how to share the good faith effort checklist results based on completed testing. Results may be shared for a grade level at a school when all testing is completed for that grade level. Please note that negative consequences or punishments shall not be administered to students based on a perceived lack of effort during testing. A reward system may still be in place for good faith effort. A student could not earn a reward, and that is acceptable, but you cannot assign additional negative consequences to that student. For example, if the reward for good faith effort is extra recess, it is acceptable for a student to not earn that, but you may not take away more than the original reward as a consequence for not meeting expectations on the checklist. A student may not lose their regularly assigned recess or be required to walk during recess due to a perceived lack of good faith effort. The good faith effort checklist should not be rewarded after each individual session or day, and the results or rewards should not be made available to students before all testing is complete. With online testing, some currently used good faith effort checklists may require updates. Items included on the checklist may differ for online versus paper pencil testing. Using the checklist may require the teacher to mark the list as students are testing and they observe student behavior. Funding rewards for good faith effort checklists may come from various sources. The best source may be tangible donations from individuals, businesses, parents, or staff to provide student incentives. There are other regulations besides this administration code that apply to reward funding. When planning activities tied to assessment, refer to those regulations and procedures. One such regulation concerns the acceptance of donations and using school bank accounts following the Red Book rules. Monetary rewards, cash, gift certificates, etc., shall not be given to students based on test scores or as rewards for good faith effort during testing. It is not acceptable to use local school board funds or cash awards from school activity funds generated by students for student incentives or rewards to attend school during the testing window, participate in assessment activities, or perform well on state-required assessments. Extended school services or ESS funds cannot be used for test preparation. Again, please consult your school or district financial staff for the policies in place for funding acceptable rewards. For online testing, the proctor will need to note the inappropriate content while monitoring, since they will not have access to the test responses once the student submits the answers. If you have questions about how to annotate an event, please contact your BAC or DAC. If a disciplinary problem exists, students may not modify their initial response. Have you heard the terms alert response or alert paper? It refers to the student writing or drawing about events that cause harm to themselves or others. While you are actively monitoring, if you should notice blatant evidence that a student is in danger, please contact your DAC, who will contact KDE for guidance. You still should not be reading or skimming student responses. If any concerning responses are discovered during scoring, KDE will contact DACs. The Administration Code regulation discusses inclusion of special populations on page 15. Anyone providing accommodations for students with IEPs, 504 plans, or PSPs needs to participate in annual training on the inclusion of Special Populations Regulation 703 KAR 5:070 as well. Annual training is essential for staff to understand their role in providing accommodations and meeting regulatory requirements. Properly administered accommodations are intended to support students in earning valid and reliable test results and should never provide a testing advantage or automatically ensure proficient scores. A violation of the administration code does not necessarily violate the inclusion of special populations regulation. However, any violation of the inclusion regulation is automatically a violation of the administration code. Only a student who meets all of the eligibility requirements for the alternate assessment program, as identified through the Admissions and Release Committee or ARC process, may participate in that program. Administering the state required alternate assessment to a student who is not eligible is a violation of the administration code regulation. The alternate assessment program provides for some modifications to test materials and student response modes to ensure student ownership. Ownership means that the student actively and meaningfully engages with the assessment materials, questions, and responses. Any accommodation or modification should be individualized and allow for meaningful and authentic engagement. An accommodation should not remove or diminish the student's active participation. As mentioned previously in this training, materials may not be taken off-site for the purposes of modification. Working on alternate assessment materials after the completion deadline is prohibited. If a student does not use an accommodation or assistive device as a regular part of instruction, they should not use it during the alternate assessment. Anyone administering the alternate assessment components must complete required training specific to the assessment. Assessment components such as binders containing test items, field test thumb drives, student response sheets, etc., are considered secure test items and shall be kept in double locked storage while not being used for test administration. Just as with other state required assessments, altering results of alternate assessment components is prohibited. Some allegation prevention tips surrounding inclusion of special populations include providing the accommodations specified on a student plan. This includes enabling any necessary technology, checking for calculators if permitted, and being sure not to provide unspecified accommodations for students who do not have them marked on a plan. Additionally, make sure all assessments are administered in order. If a makeup session is required, consult the TAM for that assessment or contact KDE for guidance. Some state-required assessments have additional required trainings. Please complete these trainings to avoid being in violation of the Administration Code regulation. Before administering the AKSA to a student, be sure that student is qualified for that assessment and it is reflected in the student IEP. It's now time for our fourth check for understanding. We will read through these yes or no questions and then discuss the answers. Question 1, is it acceptable to do test prep activities or scrimmage tests if no feedback is given or applied to future instruction? No. Scrimmages, content review, and benchmark testing types of activity are only acceptable if results are used to guide further instruction and to identify and improve areas for growth. Question 2, is it acceptable for a good faith checklist to include efforts such as bringing a fully charged device, sitting quietly after finishing, and not using unapproved electronic devices? Yes, good faith checklists may include the efforts listed above. They may not require the use of specific strategies, answer lengths, or anything that would take away student ownership of assessment results. Question 3, is a violation of the inclusion of special populations regulation also a violation of the Administration Code regulation? The answer is yes. Violating the inclusion of special populations regulation while providing accommodations is also a violation of the Administration Code. Question 4. Is there additional training required to administer alternate assessment components? Yes, it is required to complete and pass additional training requirements before administering alternate assessment components. At times, there may be concerns about errors or appropriateness in content or answer choices in test material. What does the regulation say about reporting test material concerns? If you have a concern regarding an error, content, appropriateness of an item, etc., do not discuss in any manner with others. To report the concern, complete the following steps. First, do not reproduce the test item in any way. Photocopying, photographing, handwriting, typing, scanning, or emailing the question in whole, in part, or paraphrasing it in any way. Next, identify the location of the error, the grade level, the subject area, the test form, the item number, and the page number if applicable. Next, summarize the error in general. You may say something like, no correct answer choice. The summary shall not unduly compromise the security of the assessment by revealing the content of the item. Remember to provide the student SSID. And finally, notify the DAC, who shall then contact KDE, Office of Assessment and Accountability, and forward any requested documentation. Here is an example of an appropriate report of a concern regarding secure test materials. It includes all of the information needed to find the item in question without compromising test security. There is nothing in this report that would indicate any content or any secure material. The reported material should not be discussed with anyone during or after the test session aside from making the report to the BAC or DAC. As much as we try to have a perfect test administration, testing allegations can occur. All potential testing violations of the Administration Code regulation, inclusion of special populations regulation, or TAM, must be reported as allegations to KDE for investigation. Anyone may report allegations by notifying school, district staff, or directly to KDE. Allegations can be reported anonymously through phone calls or emails. The reported information must be sufficient enough to warrant an investigation. Reports lacking enough information are stalled and cannot be followed up with an investigation. These allegations are investigated by KDE staff. They require documentation of the incident to be submitted and can include school visits or interviews with those involved. Once the investigation is complete, the testing allegations coordinator reports findings and makes recommendations to the commissioner. The recommendations from KDE do not include disciplinary action. However, the violation may be also referred to EPSB. The commissioner will then communicate with the district superintendent, who will apply the recommendations, including any locally determined disciplinary action. The impact of allegation reporting on student scores varies by assessment type and outcome of the investigation. Some assessment vendors may choose to withhold, invalidate, or lower student scores based on the nature of the confirmed issue, such as plagiarism. Other assessments may not impact the individual student score, but may adjust a school or district's accountability reporting. In addition, KDE may require schools with serious test security issues, as determined during the allegation process, to follow specific testing guidelines. For example, two-person control of secure test materials, additional monitoring, etc., during future test administrations. If a school or district's accountability classification is impacted, they may challenge that action via the appeal process described in 703 KAR 5:240 Accountability Administrative Procedures and Guidelines. Here are some categories of allegations and some examples. Please note that these examples are not an exhaustive list. Note how these align with other examples given previously in the allegation prevention best practice slides throughout the training. The allegation examples here discuss issues related to testing order, test time, accommodations for special populations, and other allegations related to test prep, training issues, or security breaches. Sometimes, parents or other persons not employed by a Kentucky public school district ask to review secure assessment components. The administration code also addresses this and provides guidelines. Local districts should never allow the review of secure materials. If parents or other persons not employed by a Kentucky public school district wish to review secure test components, they should contact KDE to request a time to review materials in person at the KDE offices in Frankfort. KDE may permit this review on the conditions of availability of appropriate staff to supervise the review activities and the reviewer signing a non-disclosure form. One component of the state assessment and accountability system is public reporting of the student data and non-academic indicators. Aggregated student data and accountability indicators are reported publicly for schools and districts. Local districts shall be responsible for submitting this data as accurately as possible and are responsible for informing KDE of any known errors in the data reported. Reporting of incorrect data for the purpose of inaccurately affecting public reports shall be considered a violation of this administration code and shall be treated as described in this document. During an embargo, authorized district and school staff may discuss assessment data internally with school and district personnel after signing a non-disclosure agreement. However, data cannot be shared in public meetings or by the media until public release. This is to protect the confidentiality and privacy of individual student data and the security of the summary data and reports. Releasing embargoed data without the consent of KDE shall be considered a violation of this regulation. It's time for our fifth and final check for understanding. Again, we will read through these yes or no questions and discuss the answers. Question 1. If you have a concern about a test item, is it acceptable to summarize the question when reporting to administration? The answer is no. You may never reproduce a test item in any way, in whole, in part, or in summary. Please refer to the process outlined in this training. Question 2. Are DACs expected to make determinations about what constitutes a reportable testing allegation? The answer is no. All potential testing allegations must be reported. Question 3. Is it acceptable for a parent to review a secure test item at the district's central office if they request? The answer is no. Local districts should never allow the review of secure materials. And finally, can only authorized staff review and discuss assessment data during the embargo period after signing a non-disclosure? Yes, during an embargo, authorized district and school staff may discuss assessment data internally after signing a non-disclosure agreement. However, that data cannot be shared in public meetings or by the media until public release. Thank you for participating in the Administration Code Regulation Training with the Office of Assessment and Accountability, Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. If you have any questions, please contact us at KDE DAC Information. Email dacinfo@education.ky.gov or call us at 502-564-4394.